Thank you very much. Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Ian Mann. I will be the chair of today's meeting. I'm joined via Zoom with Harvey Diamond and Diane Knight, panel members. The assessment department personnel today is Jennifer Martins, and the administrative personnel is Nicole Carnegie. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player and you will be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today, and the session will close after all of the applications have been heard. The board will deliberate in private and make its decisions, and you will receive those decisions by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 6 on our docket today. Ms. Carnegie, would you please affirm both the assessor's and the applicant's testimony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Assessor, please state your full name.
Jennifer Suzanne Martins.
You affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Mr. Reimer, please state your full name.
Very well, Reimer.
You affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 1 on the docket, the street address of 1870 Portage Avenue. Ms. Martins, would you make your presentation, please?
This is file number 23-277. Roll number 07020157001870 Portage Avenue. We have for the 2024 roll year an assessed value of $1,051,000. This is a strip mall with 4 premises, which was built in 1986 with a wall height of 12 feet, a land area of 10,976 square feet, and a plan area of 4,500 square feet. We go to page 2. We notice that there was a sale April 1st, 2021 for $380,000. We have no information on this sale. We know that it was from one company to another company, but there's no information of whether it was an arm's length sale. On page 3, we have some rental comparables that range in from $15 a square foot to $16.50 a square foot. These are also strip malls. On page 4, we have the income workup. We show the 4 premises. We have the leasable area as 4,337 square feet. We have the potential rental income at $68,239 with a 4% vacancy loss. We have the expenses at 3% and the shortfall at $9 per square foot, giving us a net operating income of $61,983. To that, we've applied a capitalization rate of 5.9%, giving us the estimated value after adjustment of $1,051,000. Okay. And that is everything for this one. Thank you.
Did you want to address your capitalization rate table?
I believe we've taken a look at it. It is on page 6. We do have strip malls in the retail section that shows that our 20th percentile to 80th percentile goes from 6 to 6.8. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of common issues to all the files, one of which is the non-recoverable expense and the other of which is capitalization rate. So with your permission, what I propose to do is the questions of Ms. Martins would be very similar among these properties this morning. I'd ask if it's meets with your approval that I would simply ask the questions once and ask that those comments be carried forward to the remainder of the files.
That makes sense to me. Your written materials are filed. I had a chance. I think we all had a chance to review them. So let's assume, or let's ensure that those questions asked on this matter apply to all matters then today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Martins, could we go briefly to page 4 then, please? And is it correct to say that all of these parameters from the potential rent through to the cap rate are based on the model parameters in this case?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And that includes the total expense, I guess the non-recoverable expenses the department's got totaling 3%?
Yes.
And that is intended to cover both what's historically been known as the other or structural expense and also other non-recoverable expenses relating to the property?
Yes.
And the capitalization rate, Ms. Martins, at 5.9%, that again is a model parameter in this case, as I understand it. If we turn then here, page 6, so the department has not in this instance or for these matters generally provided you with any of the capitalization rate individual analysis that would indicate the capitalization rate range in this case, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Knight, any questions?
No, thank you.
Sorry, Ms. Knight.
That's
Mr.
okay.
Diamond, I apologize. Mr. Diamond.
Yes, Ms. Martins, I'm looking at your page 6, the cap rates the city utilizes, and it shows a strip mall. If it was, I guess, the 20th best property in the city would have a cap rate of 6%, and if it's at the 80% level, in other words, there's only 20%, I guess, worse than that, it would be 6.8. Where would you say this property ranks if you look at all the strip malls in the city? Would you say that this property is better than would rank less than 20% towards the top?
I'm sorry, I haven't taken, I don't have all of the strip malls in the city memorized in my head enough to be able to give a valid answer on where I would quantify the percentage of the quality of this strip mall in relation to any of the other strip malls in the city.
Okay, let me ask you the question differently then. Do you think that the model cap rate of 5.9% might be an error? It looks low to me.
An error?
Yeah, by the model.
No, I don't think it would be an error. If we look at where this strip mall is located, it has better traffic flow in front of it than many other strip malls. The model has taken a wide variety of parameters into consideration when considering this and has had an opportunity to actually take a look at all of the strip malls in the city and the information that we get from the income and expense mailers. And the model has taken that information from all of the strip malls in the city, which I'm not familiar with all of the strip malls in the city, and has been able to compound all the information that all of the owners have sent us and taken that to and compared it to what the parameters that are this strip mall.
So are you telling me the model is always right?
No, I'm not telling you that the model is always right, but the model is a tool that we use where we take all the information and we are able to put the information together. And the model is not always right, but the model is always the model. Similarly, the model is probably better at estimating where, in relation to other strip malls, this one sits than I am. If I just walk past and say, oh yeah, I visited that strip mall, I visited that strip mall, I visited that strip mall. If you ask me the age of them, I have no idea, whereas the model will.
Okay, so you're not acknowledging then that the model's cap rate might be aggressively low.
No, I feel that this one, it was built in the 80s, which isn't brand new, but it's a lot newer than a lot of the other strip malls. It's also in a fairly good neighborhood, whereas if we were looking at a strip mall on perhaps Sargent or perhaps Sherbrooke, that the area would definitely play be in play on that. And this one has excellent traffic flow in front of it, which would make it better than some of the other strip malls. I can't say exactly of the list of, I don't even know how many strip malls we have in the city off the top of my head. I can't say exactly where this one places, but it definitely does place significantly better than many of the other strip malls that I've had at hearings for the Board of Revision.
Okay, because I look at item number 2 on the docket and the model there, another property on Portage Avenue.
I'm sorry, are we comparing another assessment to this one?
No, I'm not comparing the assessment. I'm comparing another cap rate that was utilized by the model. And that one, it was 6.7, which seems to be a large discrepancy for another property on Portage Avenue that has good traffic and everything else. So I'm just wondering why the model would be so different from one to the other.
Do we know what the repairs off the top of our heads?
I'm asking questions right now, so no, I'm not just asking you the question.
Okay. Well,
I'm not asking me questions. I'm asking you. Okay.
That off the top of my head, I'm not aware of the history of the permits that have been taken out for repairs and upgrades. I'm not aware of what the next property that we're looking at that we're going to compare the cap rate with. I'm not sure what the tenancy is. I'm not sure how long the tenants have been there. I'm not sure if we're taking into account any type of construction or deferred maintenance or any of the other items that might have been involved with that property, because I haven't, we're not discussing that one here. This one doesn't seem to have any deferred maintenance, and it seems to be that there, as far as the information that the department has in regards to deferred maintenance and in regards to the area and in regards to the size of the property and the age of the property, this is the model cap rate, and I'm not here to say that the cap rate is incorrect.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Just to follow up with that, you talked about the whether there was deferred maintenance, whether there was anything newer that would account for the differential in cap rates. Have any permits been, or are you aware of any permits, or do you have any evidence of permits taken out with respect to this property at 1870 Portage Avenue for upgrades?
No, I did not delve deeply into that. I did not include any of the permits in my brief. I don't have any. I'm going by what what our model has looked at as what's in our system and has developed for this property.
Okay, and did you do an inspection of this property?
No, I did not.
Okay. Now, I see that the outdoor parking in your property description is noted at 0. I believe in the applicant's brief that talks about some parking areas, and I think in one of the overhead pictures, it shows parking. Are you aware of parking at the strip mall, or is it all street parking?
I do believe that there is parking both in front and behind this property.
Okay, and the next question I have is with respect to your rent comparables and your rent workup. The rent workup is all model driven, ranging from $15.39 a square foot through $16.53 cents per square foot. That's
Yes.
Okay, that's all model driven.
Yes.
Okay, and in your comparables, I'm just looking 1850 Portage Avenue, that would be pretty close to the subject property, right?
Yes, these are all comparables that are in the same like the same zone that we have for this property.
Sure, and 1850 Portage Avenue, the rent or the lease that you have noted there as a comparable, is at $15 a square foot.
Yes, it is.
Okay. No actual leases with respect to this property?
No, due to the sale, we don't have the mailer that's applied for this one. So it is my understanding that there are actual leases on this property, but we don't have the mailer information. So I can only present the information that was given to us.
Okay. And I know you indicated that you had no information with respect to the sale, whether that was parties or whether that was a share sale or whether that was, can you tell us if it was part of a group of property sales, or is it just the fact of a sale that was registered for $380,000?
I have no information about the sale. We've requested information about the sale, and we did not get any information back. And again, I can only present what is the information that was shared with the department.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Reimer, your evidence, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to comment right off the top on a couple of matters that arose during the questions. I can confirm that, yes, indeed, there was the sale, as indicated in Ms. Martin's brief on the reference date, actually, April 1, 2021, but it was a partial interest. So I paid no attention to that partial interest transaction. And to your question, Mr. Chairman, yes, indeed, I guess they were parties that had an arrangement, but with the partial interest being the interest that was transferred, we've simply not given it any heed, obviously, at $380,000. So if we could go briefly to pages 6 and 7 of our materials. The question arose concerning parking, and if you look at the aerial photograph on page 7, Ms. Martins was exactly right. There's parking both in the front of the storefronts and also at the rear of the building. So just to clarify, there are the parking stalls as shown there. The property was constructed in 1986, located at 1870 Portage. It's interesting. I noticed that the department's got a gross floor area of 4,500 square feet, but the owner is actually reporting a leasable area of 4,540 square feet. I'm guessing that was based upon his own measurements. For the purposes of our evaluation, I am in fact using the 4,540 square feet. The reason for that is that the rents that are calculated are in fact based upon that area. So even if that area is out a little bit, all that would happen is that if one, for instance, used 4,500 square feet, one would have to then increase the per square foot rates to reflect what's actually being generated at this property. So for the board's information, we're using 4,540 square feet because that's the basis on which the rents, the gross rents in this case, are calculated, and you'll see that in my valuation. So then if we turn briefly to page 11, as you can see there, there's actually gross rents in place at the subject that ranged between $20 a square foot and $22.55 a square foot. The gross lease costs are estimated at $9, which results in a potential net market income of $56,940, as you can see on the chart towards the bottom of page 11. And that then equals a rate of $12.54 a square foot. These are based on tenancies secured between August of 2018 and September of 2020. So we certainly believe that represents the best evidence of the ability of the property to generate the net rents. On page 12, we've got some rent comparables in the area. And as you can see there, the average and median is 1317 and 1348 respectively. And certainly the rental rates that were secured were well within that range. And we're suggesting the application of the potential rent of $56,940 in this case, based on the rents being achieved and those rents being consistent with the market in the area. The vacancy rate we're applying is 4%, similar to the assessors. Shortfall rate of 9%, and I'm at page 13 now. For the reasons that we'll speak to very briefly, we're suggesting the non-recoverable expense allowance should remain at 5%, along with what's historically been known as the other expense or structural expense of 2%, for a total non-recoverable expense allowance of 7% of effective gross income. And in terms of the capitalization rate, we're suggesting, I'm going to go through my study very briefly, but we're suggesting the range for standard quality retail properties is between 6.75% and 7.25%, assuming that the non-recoverable expense allowance of 5% is applied. And in this case, we'll apply a rate of 7% to the subject property. So if we turn briefly to page 14 then, the total potential rent that we've applied is $56,940. 4% vacancy, $9 shortfall, 5 and 2 for the non-recoverable expense allowances, and a cap rate of 7% results in a suggested value of $703,000 in this case. For the information of the board, if they wish to refer to it, the gross rental rates are based on the information that starts on page 18 and specifically on page 20 for the gross rental rates in place as of the reference date in the subject property. So, Mr. Chairman, again, I know that we've all heard this many times. I propose to briefly go through the non-recoverable expense study, and I will be very brief. I am happy to answer any questions if there are particular points that are not addressed in my verbal testimony. I propose to go through it, given the familiarity of the board members and Ms. Martins. I propose to go through it at a very high level. As you're aware, Mr. Chairman, our position is that the non-recoverable expense allowance was always intended to relate to true non-recoverable expenses and not quote-unquote management fees, which typically are recovered. If you go to page 9 of this study, middle of the page on page 9, you've got several expenses there that are typically included in the operating statement for the property. It includes some expenses like mortgage interest, depreciation, and others that would not be included in evaluation for assessment purposes. You've got a couple of expenses such as bad debt expense, which is covered through the vacancy allowance, utilities for vacant units, which is covered by shortfall. So among those expenses, if you turn to page 10, there's a total of 4 expenses that we're suggesting would form the core of the non-recoverable expense allowance, and those are leasing commissions, professional fees, asset management fees, and just a couple of limited cases in advertising and marketing expenses. So on page 11, we've got the chart, the second column from the left being the relevant chart for the purposes of the discussions this morning. It shows, as you can see there, the average of 6.64% and median of 5.98% for what we're referring to as those core non-recoverable expenses. Predictably, if you include tenant inducements and tenant improvements, that's the column on the very right-hand side of that chart. The indicated expenses would increase substantially. That is not what we're relying on, but we are providing it for the board's information. Starting at pages 12 through 15, we did, this is new for this study prepared for the 2023 assessment. We do speak in our materials about the interconnection between the capitalization rate analysis and the non-recoverable expenses. And in our capitalization rate analysis, we have in fact applied the full 5% for non-recoverables plus 2% for structural. And we wanted to draw to the board's attention the mathematical effect of reducing the non-recoverable expense allowance from 5%, which had been prior, to 2020 down to 1%, which is the position advanced by the department for this assessment cycle. And on page 13, you can see there's a valuation based on the set of assumptions located at the top of page 13. With the application of the 5% non-recoverable expense allowance, the indicated cap rate in that case is 7.38%. And if you turn to page 15, then using the very same assumptions, if one reduces the non-recoverable expenses to 1%, so that the total allowance is then 3%, again, which is the position advanced by the department, the indicated cap rate goes from 7.38 to 7.71%. That's the reason why in our analysis and our evaluation, we're suggesting that if the board chooses to reduce the non-recoverable expense allowance from 5% to 1% for a total of a 3% allowance, including the structural allowance, then our requested cap rate would actually increase by 25 basis points. The mathematics in this particular example that I've given you is actually 33, but we're settling on a 25% basis point increase for that scenario where the non-recoverable expenses are reduced from 5 to 1. In terms of the retail capitalization rate study, if I could ask the board members and Ms. Martins to turn to that study. And again, I'm going to go through it at a very high level, knowing the familiarity of the board members and Ms. Martins with the study. We do in the first several pages talk about the pre-pandemic economic circumstances, including the prevalence of the online shopping model even prior to the pandemic. And then starting at page 8, we talk about some of the trends that were apparent through the pandemic, and of course our reference date being right in the midst of the pandemic. And one of the topics I wanted to bring to the board's attention, if you turn to page 16, Altus had an opportunity to conduct surveys of the market opinions of the most sophisticated professionals, building managers, owners in Canada during the pandemic, and those surveys were conducted in April, July, and November of 2020. And I did want to draw the board's attention to the results of these surveys to a limited extent. At the bottom of page 17, that is the talking about the projected changes in the market rent. And as you can see, the majority of the respondents in the darker shaded bar there, the majority anticipated no change, with some respondents indicating an expectation of rents actually decreasing. Some were actually projecting a small increase, but certainly the overwhelming majority were looking at rents that they projected to be flat in the context of the pandemic environment. And then at the bottom of page 18 and the top of page 19, the questions that were posed related to cap rate trends and expectations. And for the top quality assets, this is now located at the bottom of page 18. The expectation in November, which is again the dark shaded bar, was certainly that capitalization rates for retail properties, for even the top quality properties, would be increasing between 25 and 50 basis points, with other respondents predicting an even higher increase of between 50 and 100 basis points. There were certainly a few optimistic investors that were predicting a further compression in the cap, but they represented very much the minority, with most respondents indicating that they expected capitalization rates to rise, reflecting the risk in that environment. And at the top of page 19, the lower quality properties, again, significant numbers were indicating they expected a 25 to 50 basis point increase, but also, as one would expect, there were also significant numbers that expected capitalization rates to increase between 50 and 100 basis points. The 50 to 75 basis points being roughly 30% of the respondents, and 75 to 100 basis point increase, roughly 20% of the respondents. So with that environment in mind, we then, if we could ask the board members and Ms. Martins to turn to page 24. And we've got our capitalization rate analysis and the properties shown there. The second column from the right represents the what we're calling the Altus cap, and again, that's based on the application of the full 5% for the non-recoverables plus 2% for the structural. If you take out, or not take out, but reduce the 5% down to 1, the equivalent cap rate is on the very right-hand column. And as I mentioned earlier, it has the mathematical effect usually of increasing the indicated cap by about 30 points. So the based on those specific transactions, in the case of the subject property, we're classifying this as a standard quality retail property, and our conclusions for the capitalization rates are shown at page 32. And again, based on the analysis of the transactions that we've researched, you can see in the middle, in the chart in the middle of the page, the middle row, the standard quality ranges from 6.75 to 7.25%, assuming that the 5% non-recoverable is included in the analysis. So for all of those reasons, going back briefly now to the main brief, and at page 14, with the potential net market income of 56,940, 4% vacancy, the allowances that is shown, including the 5% non-recoverable, and the 7 cap, we come in at a suggested value of 703,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Ms. Martins, questions?
Yes, in regards to the 2 studies, did any of the properties that you included in the studies, were any of them strip malls?
So the Mr. Chairman, if we could go to the let's start with the capitalization rate. So if we turn then to page 25. So at the top of page 25, Jefferson Avenue is a grocery anchored strip with a total area of 61,894 square feet. Index number 2, Provencher Boulevard. Again, I guess to be fair, Ms. Martins, when I'm going through these, I would consider these types of properties to be strip malls, notwithstanding that the department might have a different coding on them. But certainly I believe they would be comparable properties. Index number 2 on Provencher, you can see at the bottom of page 25 and top of page 26, it's actually got a strip towards the back of the property, and at the front there's a fast food restaurant. Index number 3 is a similar strip property located on Goulet Street. Index number 4 is again a strip property located on Nairn, and this is at the top of page 27. Index number 5, again a strip property located on Dalhousie. Index number 6 is a strip property located on Kildare. Index number 7 is a retail warehouse, so that I would not classify as the same as the subject. Index number 8 is coded as a store, a single occupant. Index 9 again would be a retail warehouse property, and that's on page 29. Page 30, Corridon Avenue would be a newer retail strip. Index number 11 would be a single occupant Rexall store. Page 31, index 12 on Berry Street, that would be, it's coded as a store. And index number 13 is a strip very close to Health Sciences that actually has restaurants in it. You'd also asked the question, Ms. Martins, about the non-recoverable and the properties there. So let me get the correct page. So if you go to page 11, and again, this would be, I guess, a question of semantics, but typically the properties that are coded CMRNS, the neighborhood shopping centers, would be the most comparable, and I'm effectively treating them as strip malls. So the ones in that coding on page 11, CMRNS would be the strip malls.
Okay. So am I to understand that you feel that the properties that are similar type properties, but have large anchor built properties, that those are comparable with this type of strip that just has I have 4 premises, but there's only 3 tenants.
So we allude to this in our study, Ms. Martins, but certainly there's two segments of the market in the pandemic environment where the risk that was created by that environment was perceived to be less impactful. One of them was on grocery anchored strips and the other was on drugstore anchored strips. So that's of course not the case with the subject property, which is why I'm treating it as an average quality property. But yes, I'd suggest with the indicators that are shown on our page 24, that there are properties that are certainly comparable, but would not be comparable to the grocery and drugstore anchored strip. It carries with it higher risk than that asset class.
Okay, and further on that, is it fair to compare properties that are roughly $1 million with some of these large multi-million-dollar properties? Do you feel that that's a fair comparison?
Absolutely, and the reason being that, and again, going back to our retail study, these indicators for retail properties are reflecting, in some cases, certainly better quality assets, and in other cases, comparable types of assets that do reflect the risk in that pandemic environment. So yes, I very much do believe, Ms. Martins, that this represents the best evidence to the board as to the expectations of the investors concerning cap rates, 100%.
Thank you. That's everything.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Ms. Knight, any questions?
My questions have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Mr. Diamond?
Yes, Mr. Weimer, I'm looking at your workout on page 24 and evaluating this property using actual lease in place, correct?
Sorry, Mr. Diamond, on our main brief on page 14, correct?
Page 14, correct.
Yes. That's exactly right. I am using the leases in place that were negotiated between middle of 18 and September of 20. Yes.
Okay, so you show, I guess, a potential rent at $56,940.
Yes.
And there were no vacancies in the property?
No.
Okay. You're also, I guess, then the 4% vacancy, you're alluding to the model then when you go to the vacancy and the shortfall, because you wouldn't have a vacancy or a shortfall, would you?
There's no vacancy or shortfall, Mr. Diamond, but certainly no investor that certainly I'm aware of would assume a 0% vacancy rate for their property. But yes, no doubt it was 100% full as of the reference date.
Okay, so basically then though, if the 4% vacancy would be 2,278, and you have a shortfall of another 1,634, close to $4,000, which is very, very close to the non-recoverable and the structural that you have, which should also be very close to $4,000.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And all these leases were in place when the property was purchased. You alluded to the fact that it was, I know it's a sale, and I'm not saying we're going to take effect this sale, but what was the interest that was in fact transferred at that time?
You know, that's a very good question, Mr. Chairman. I'm not familiar with the exact interest. Typically, these things are half interest, but I learned that it was a partial interest sale, and I disregarded it at that stage.
Okay, if not knowing the amount, it's
that's correct.
Okay, that's my questions.
Thank you. I have some questions, I guess, turning first of all to the potential net market income at page 11.
Yes.
You have the gross rents in your from the leases that you provide, from the lease amounts that you provided, and then you indicate that the gross lease costs are estimated to be $9 per square foot. Where does that number come from? Is that from any specific information, or is that an Altus or one of your company's tables?
Truth be told, Mr. Chairman, that's based on, because the information, and I've attached that questionnaire, it didn't actually show the expenses because of course of that partial interest transaction. It's an estimate loosely based on the shortfall rate. So we were just assuming that $9 rate would be a close approximation to the actual expenses, but there is no specific number I can point you to. It is an estimate.
Yeah, because I'm worried about double counting. If the $9 results in a lower net per square foot, and that's double counted and picked up on either shortfall vacancy or even the non-recoverables, then that's going to skew it a little bit higher.
If the actual expenses would have turned out to be less than $9, then mathematically, absolutely right, Mr. Chairman. I do believe the $9 rate is a reasonable assumption, but you're right. I have nothing specific that I can point you to that would confirm that.
Okay, I'm looking now at page 12, and the questions will be similar. Your net rent per square foot on those properties, is that a net rent as calculated with an estimated gross lease expenses, or is that net rent actually provided?
No, these are actual net rents, Mr. Chairman. Typically, and they'll provide this for the information of the board, it's not specifically in my evidence, but typically the retail properties in the majority of the cases would actually rent based on a triple net lease. Everything you see on page 12 that information is based on the triple net leases, but the subject for the owner's own sort of the way he structured it, he went on gross leases. But these are all net leases on page 12.
And the average and median are above the 1254 that you have allocated.
They are certainly, but again, Mr. Chairman, I'd remind the board, if you go to page 11, the lease start dates for these leases in place, two of them were actually in 2020. And I stress that from our perspective, when you've got leases negotiated that close to the reference date, they represent the best evidence of the net rent achievable for the property, save and except for your comment about the assumed $9 gross rental costs for the property.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I've got any more questions at this time. Ms. Martins, any need of a summary?
No, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Reimer.
No, thank you.
Then that will conclude this matter, and we will move on to number 2 on the list at 2609 Portage Avenue Street address. Ms. Martins, your evidence, please.
Thank you. This is file number 23-299. Rule number 070735290000 2609 Portage Avenue.
You're breaking up on us. Sorry.
Sorry. Do you need me to repeat that? Nope. Okay.
Mr. Chair, did you want Ms. Martins to repeat it, or were you able to hear her?
I was able to hear it. It wasn't breaking up at my end. But
Okay.
if there's a problem with it breaking up, then please, Ms. Martins, would you start again and repeat that just so that we have a record that's uninterrupted?
Sure thing. Thank you. This is file number 23-299. Rule number 070735290000. The address is 2609 Portage Avenue. For roll year 2024, the assessed value is $3,195,000. This one was built in 1980. It has 6 premises. It is again a strip mall. The land area is 27,913 square feet. The plan area is 16,528 square feet. There was a sale for $3 million and it's registered on April 1st, 2021. When I took a look at it, these are 2 companies, and it does appear to be an arm's length sale. On page 3, we have some rental comparables, and they are ranging from $15.50 a square foot to $18.50 a square foot. These are all on Portage Avenue. They are I believe they are all strip malls. They, with the exception of the one at the last one at the bottom, they were built in the 1980s. And each of the units are comparable with having square foot between 1,030 and 2,400 square feet. If we look on page 4, we have the income workup. It does not, however, add up to the appropriate value. There was a previous board decision on this one. So the value of the $3,195 is not determined by the income workup. It is determined by the board decision. I'm just looking. So the board I don't have the information on how that was changed. We do have the capitalization rate chart on page 6. And the board decision is on page 8 and 9. Sorry, or is it till 10? Page 8 till 10. We do have a mailer on this one on page 11, but it is a post-reference mailer. Oh, no, sorry. My mistake. It is the correct mailer, but the information that was entered onto it wasn't the 2021 information. The information entered on it, it was given in time, but it was entered for the next year.
Well, that's difference information, then well, we won't be considering that. Thanks.
Well, it was the time at it was handed into the department on time, but it's the information at the time, but it wasn't for the previous year. So the rents would be considered in place. On page 17, there is an overhead picture showing the location on Portage Avenue between Wallasey and Thompson. And on the bottom there is an overhead view of this strip mall. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just like to comment briefly on, Mr. Chairman, your comment on the income and expense mailer on page 11 of the department's brief. I'm agreeing with Ms. Martins actually, and I've seen this. I'm familiar with the submissions by this owner, and the incorrect date is what's, if you look on page 11 at the top, the date is shown as December 31st, 22. I believe that's where the error arose, because if you look to the right of that, due date is May of 22. So actually, I don't think this is post reference. I think it's an error on the submission in account or in listing the year end. It should say 12/31/2021. So I just wanted to clarify that. Ms. Martins, could we go briefly then to your page 4? And I appreciate, so looking at the valuation there, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the valuation actually shown would be with the model driven parameters prior to the Board of Division order that resulted in a value of $3,625,985.
Yes, it would have been rounded up to $3,626,000.
Okay, okay, and so that mathematically, at least that's the value that the model kicked out with respect to the original 2023 assessment.
Yes, but if you look on page 8 and 9, there's information about that. The decision was based on the evidence presented by the applicant for the 2023
right
appeal.
Okay. Now, actually, Mr. Chairman, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, any questions?
I do not. Thank you.
Mr. Diamond?
I have no questions. Thank you.
And I have no questions. Mr. Reimer, your evidence, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask again that the questions asked and answered on the non-recoverable and cap rate be carried forward, please?
Absolutely.
Could we go briefly then to page 7? So this is a very similar overhead shot that Ms. Martins had presented at the top half of page 7, showing there's some parking at the rear as well as some parking at the front of the property. The land to building ratio, though, as you can see from that aerial, the land to building ratio is low at only 1.69 to 1. And that certainly for these types of properties is on the low side. The present owner did buy the property for $3 million right on the reference date of April 1, 2021. If we go briefly then please to page 11. And as you can see there on page 11, again, there were gross rents that range between $17.14 a square foot gross and $28.35 a square foot gross. The gross lease costs in this case are estimated to be $6.45 a square foot. That is, and Mr. Chairman, this will go to your earlier questions, and in this case, it is based specifically on the income and expense mailer that was submitted for 2021 with an adjustment for management fees, actually, because the management fees that were shown on the income and expense mailer actually exceeded the typical norm of 5%, so we've adjusted it down. 109,070 total expenses, less an adjustment of 3760 to bring the management fees down to 5%, which equals expenses of 105,000, and that then equals a rate of 645 a square foot. So that's the rate we've applied in the chart at the bottom of page 11 to bring the gross rents down to net. And as you can see, the net rents then range from $10.69 a foot to $21.90 a foot. On page 12, again, we've got rental comparables. Certainly the rents fall within the general range of indicators, and we're suggesting that the application of those net rents be applied in this case. Vacancy allowance, the market vacancy allowance we've applied is 4, shortfall rate of $9, and management expense again of 5% plus 2 for structural. And capitalization rate in this case, we certainly believe that given the lower land to building ratio, and this isn't a particularly old building, but it is getting up there. It was built in 1980, and we're suggesting that those factors would support a rate based on the analysis in our capitalization rate study of 7.25%. So if you turn to page 14 then, the valuation based on the rents in place as checked by the market, the total income is $240,007, and with the application of 4%, $9 shortfall, 5 and 2, and a 7 1/4 rate, it comes in at a value rounded of $2,875,000. I do note for the board's reference, I'll just run that calculation right now. If you take, and I am mindful of that price on the reference date, and if you would apply in lieu of the 7 1/4%, if you apply the very same parameters with a 7% cap rate, it comes in at $2,977,000, which is very, very consistent with the purchase price on the reference date for the subject. So with all those comments in mind, I request that the assessment be reduced to $2,875,000, or in the alternative, applying the 7% cap rate, $2,977,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Ms. Martins, questions?
Yes. Yes, sorry. If we're looking at going to actuals and being appropriate, when we see that there's the costs estimated to be $6.45 per square foot, would that be a better number to apply to the shortfall than $9 a square foot?
Yes, it would be. Yeah.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Ms. Martins, your question's a very good one. And actually, as I was working through this morning, I entirely agree. So I'll run that calculation, Mr. Chairman, because Ms. Martins makes a good point. So using the 645 rate, the amended shortfall would be 4,211. And so now I'll run the numbers using that lower shortfall rate. So 230, 407 minus 4211 for shortfall minus 11,520. That wouldn't change for non-recoverable minus 4608 for the structural. The revised NOI would be $210,068. So now I'll give the board again two separate scenarios. My request, of course, was based on the 7.25 cap. So that indicated value would be $2,898,000 rounded. Or if one were inclined to use the 7%, that value is $3,001,000. 3,001,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Diamond, any questions? Oh,
Yes, Mr. Reimer, this matter went to the Board of Revision last year on the same basic assessment as we have now. Is that correct?
It did, yes, indeed, by a different agent, yeah.
I understand. And do you know if that was appealed to the municipal board?
I do not know if that agent appealed it further.
Wouldn't that be the right way of tending to this matter? But you already have a decision based on all these parameters by another board. Wouldn't it be the best way to go? Because you're asking us to reconsider another board has already considered on all the evidence put forward at that time on this property.
With respect, Mr. Diamond, I'm going to suggest no, and here's why. Certainly our opinion of, as you can see from our materials, our opinion of a fair and equitable assessment differs from the previous agent, and this is assuming that that agent didn't appeal it up to municipal board. So I am asking that the board seriously consider the evidence that's been presented here. But I am, Mr. Diamond, to your question, I'm very cognizant of the fact that there was a previous Board of Revision order within the same assessment cycle. But I do believe, again, our opinion being it appears different than the previous agent, I'm asking the board to consider the evidence presented this morning.
If in fact it was appealed and appealed successfully, that would result in this assessment that you're now appearing on also being reduced similarly, would it not?
Mr. Diamond, sorry you lost me there.
Saying if in fact it was appealed successfully, or that result of the municipal board would also affect what we're hearing today, would it not?
I understand. Actually, it would not, and the reason well, I shouldn't say. I say quickly it should not, but here's my understanding of the sort of the legalities of that situation and the effects on the carry forward. If the previous agent appealed to the municipal board for 2023, and let's say that municipal board ultimately found a value of, just call it 2.95 million, 2,950,000. If the Board of Revision at this hearing chooses to confirm the assessment, there is a case that was heard at the Court of Appeal involving Red River College that says a confirmation by the board would not impact the carry forward of a prior municipal board order within the same cycle. So that's scenario number one. However, if this board were to reduce it, say, from 3,195,000 to 3,050,000, whatever the number might be, that order, because there's a change in the assessment, that would have the effect of stopping the carry forward of any prior municipal board order. And the only way to give effect to that municipal board order in the second year of the cycle is if we would file a further appeal of our own at the municipal board. So there are some sort of, there's a few moving parts there. But if this board chooses to confirm the assessment, the municipal board order for 23 would still be carried forward under that case that I'm familiar with involving Red River. If this board makes a change in the 2024 assessment, that then would be the governing assessment unless and until, and only unless and until, a municipal board order relating to the 24 assessment would be filed.
Okay, any other questions I would have would be basically asked on the previous matter. So I won't ask those again, Mr. Reimer, and thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Knight, do you have any questions?
I was part of that last order, so I'm not sure if I can ask any questions.
Fair enough. I'm
Mhm.
going to allow you to ask questions if you have any pertaining
No.
to this particular
I'm
matter.
going to leave it at that.
Okay. I just have a couple of questions, Mr. Reimer, with respect to the cap rate and the calculations that you've done with respect to the actual leases in place. Those actual leases in place would have been in place at the time of the registration of the sale, or is that not correct?
Yes, they would have been.
The expenses likely would have been calculated at the time of the sale as well.
Yeah, I'm sure they would have been, yeah.
Okay, so an actual cap rate for this property, assuming as you testified that this was an arm's length transaction, could be calculated from the information that we've received. The actual NOI divided by the actual price gives you the, even with your calculation of the new NOI with the shortfall adjust, still gives you a cap rate of 7%.
Well, actually not quite. If you would take the actual NOI, and this is really important. And this goes back to the question on the prior matter, and also here, of course, because you've got a property that's 100% full. And so assuming, and I am for the moment assuming the 645 a square foot gross lease costs are a very, very close approximation of what the purchaser would have calculated. But if you recall from the previous hearing, I'm suggesting in no uncertain terms that even though the property is full, an investor will not assume in his financial modeling 100% occupancy 100% of the time. It's just not a prudent assumption. So going back to your specific question, Mr. Chairman, the actual cap rate, once I've adjusted my shortfall rate to 645 a square foot, and my revised NOI, which goes up by roughly $1,400 a square foot, the capitalization rate using those assumptions, which I believe are very fair, based on the 4% vacancy and such, and the 7% non-recoverable, all that, the indicated cap rate would be 7%. If you recall the using the revised slightly higher NOI of $210,048. If you cap that at 7%, it comes in at a revised value of $3,001,000.
Just to confirm, you'd like to call Lydia Delarant?
Which is virtually bang on to the purchase price.
That was my question. My question was the actual cap rate was was almost exactly 7% with the NOI, the new NOI that you've presented.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I misunderstood. New versus actual in place, which would reflect zero vacancy. Yes, you're absolutely right. I apologize. I misunderstood that.
Thank you. Then I don't have anything further. Ms. Martins, any summary?
No, thank you very much.
Mr. Reimer?
No, thank you.
And I would like to take a 5-minute break now. Can we come back, please, at just before 10 past?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to call the meeting back to order then and turn to number 3 on the docket. That is the street address 3269 Portage Avenue. Ms. Martins, would you present your evidence, please?
Before we start, on this one, after when I was reviewing my brief, I noticed that there was a post-reference sale, and I would like to remove that information on page 2.
Thank you. We won't consider that.
Thank you. This is file number 23-376, roll number 073255454000. The address is 3269 Portage Avenue. For the 2024 roll year, the assessed value is $1,352,000. This again is a strip mall with 4 premises built in 1969. We have a land area of 14,684 square feet and a plan area of 7,305 square feet. On page 2, we have some subject property leases. They range from $12.92 to $15.72. On page 3, we have some comparables. They range from $13.50 to $15. On page 4, we have the income workup. We have 6,922 square feet with a potential rent of $96,292. To that, we've applied a vacancy loss of 4% with expenses at 3% and a shortfall at $9 per square foot, giving us a net operating income of $87,175. We've applied a 6.45% capitalization rate, giving us the estimated value after adjustments of $1,352,000. On page 6, we have the capitalization workup. On page 8 through 10, we have the previous decision for this cycle. And we've got the mailer after that. And at the back page, on page 16, we have an overhead view of the property showing the parking lot and where the building is placed on the property. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Martins, on page 4, please. So again, to be clear, this is entirely model-driven, this valuation from right from the top at the potential net market income through to cap rate, correct?
Yes, it is.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are that's my question. And ask that the previous questions asked and answered on non-recoverable and cap rate, please.
Yeah, we'll carry those to each property. Ms. Knight, questions?
No, sir.
Mr. Diamond?
I have no questions, thank you.
And I don't have any questions. Mr. Reimer, your evidence, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would like to comment briefly. You need not turn there, but Ms. Martins had included the previous Board of Revision decision relating to the 2023 realty assessment for the subject, and I was personally involved in that. So
As was I. As was I, as it turns out.
Ah, yes. Mr. Chairman, and those of you with a legal background will understand the terminology I'm using. I was at that hearing, and I did at that time request the confirmation under 54.1. That, however, was not due to or was not based upon my opinion of a fair and equitable assessed value. There was a serious loss of confidence between Altus Group and the owner at that time relating to this appeal. And as a result of that loss of confidence and the lack of instructions, we had virtually no option other than to request the 54.1 at that time. So I wanted to provide some context for that board order. So if we turn then briefly, please, on our main submission to page 7. So this is, again, very similar aerial shot at the top of page 7 of the property. It's located at 3269 Portage Avenue at the corner of Portage and Westwood. Improvements, it's an older strip mall constructed in 1969. The reported leasable area that we have applied is actually 7,172 square feet, a little bit higher than what the department's got in this case. Land area is 14,684. Land to building ratios at just over 2 to 1 is a relatively low land to building ratio for retail properties. If one goes to page 11 then, and I won't dwell on this because I know that the potential net market income that we've applied is a couple of $1,000s higher than the market income applied by Ms. Martins in this case based on the model. As you can see there on page 11, we were applying a total potential market income of $98,062 based on leases negotiated in 2019 all the way through November of 2020. And it's those rates that we've applied in this case. Page 12, then there's some rental comparables confirming that the rental rates that were in place at the subject were certainly consistent with the indicators. And we settled on the in-place rent then at $98,062. Applied a vacancy allowance of 4%. Again, on page 13, suggesting 5 and 2 for the non-recoverables for a total expense allowance of 7%. And the capitalization rate in this case of 7.25%, given the older age of the subject and the lower land to building ratio. Turning to page 14 then, with the application of the $98,062, 4% vacancy, the $9 shortfall rate, 5 and 2, and the 7.25%, the suggested value is $1,172,000, and ask the board to order accordingly. Again, incorporating the non-recoverable and the capitalization rate submissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Martins, questions?
No questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Diamond, questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Ms. Knight?
No, sir.
I have a question relating relating to the cap rate and your cap rate study, Mr. Reimer. The property at 2609 Portage Avenue, the previous one we dealt with, I was looking for that in the cap rate study to see if it had been included, and I couldn't find it. Is it in that cap rate study, and did I just miss it?
No, it's information that we only became aware of well after the study was prepared. So, Mr. Chairman, your point is a very good one. And I had not incorporated it into this study at the time using that 7% indicated rate.
Okay, thank you. That was the only question that I had. Ms. Martins, any need for a summary?
No, thank you.
Mr. Reimer?
No, thank you.
Okay, then that matter is concluded, and we will move on to number 4 on the list at 208 Marion Street. Ms. Martins, your evidence, please.
This is file number 23-281. Roll number 060750801000. The address is 208 Marion Street. For the 2024 roll year, the assessed value is $2,760,000. This again is a strip mall. It was built in 1986. For the land area, we have 24,489 square feet, and for the plan area, we have 12,868 square feet. For the rental comparables, on page 3, they range from $14 a square foot to $16.78 per square foot. On page 4, we have our workup. The rents we have range from $14.84 per square foot to $16.31 per square foot, giving us potential rent of $198,663. We've applied a 4% vacancy loss, a 3% for expenses, and $9 per square foot for shortfall, giving us a net operating income of $179,421. To that, we've applied a capitalization rate of 6.5%, giving us our estimated value after adjustments of $2,760,000. On page 6, we have our cap rate chart. We have a mailer. Oh, sorry, the mailer is a post-reference mailer. Please ignore that. And on page 12, we have a picture of the subject property. We've got a short map just showing where this is located between Kenny and Traverse on Marion. And we have an overhead view of the strip mall. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, questions?
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just the one. Ms. Martins, on your page 4, this again is model driven right through from the potential rent through to cap rate?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, questions asked and answered on the remaining components. Thank you.
Ms. Knight, questions?
No, sir.
Mr. Diamond?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't thank you.
And I don't have any questions, so Mr. Reimer, if you can proceed with your evidence, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Could we turn briefly to page 7 of our materials? Again, pages 6 and 7, actually, you can see on page 6, the street view, and the top of page 7, the overhead map. This is, as mentioned by Ms. Martins, 228 Marion Street, east of Kenny, 1986 construction, with a reported leasable area of 12,717 feet. Again, a lower land to building ratio at 1.9 to 1. If we go then briefly to page 11, the total potential market income that we've calculated is actually $204,585. That's about $6,000 higher than the total potential income calculated by the model. We do believe, though, that represents, which includes a $16 rate for the vacant unit. We do believe that represents the best evidence of what this property is able to attain. If you turn briefly to page 12, we've got some rental comparables in the area, Provence, Ottawa, Marion, with certainly indicating that the rents being achieved are consistent with those market indicators between 2018 and 2020. So we are applying the total potential income of $204,585. Again, we've applied a 4% shortfall, $4% vacancy, $9 shortfall, 5 and 2 for the non-recoverables, for a total non-recoverable expense of 7%, and a cap rate in this case of 7% as well, reflecting, we believe, the risk profile for this property and consistent with the data in our capitalization rate analysis. So then if we go to page 14, with the application of $204,585 for the rent, 4%, 5 and 2, and a $9 shortfall rate, and a 7 cap, we come in at $2,544,000 rounded, and request the board order accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Ms. Martins, any questions?
No, thank you very much.
Mr. Diamond?
I have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Ms. Knight?
No, sir.
And I have no questions. Ms. Martins, any need for a summary?
No, thank you.
Mr. Reimer, summary?
No, thank you.
Thank you. And this matter is concluded, and we will move on to the next matter, number 5 on the list at 3485 Pembina Highway, please.
Are we ready?
Yes, please, Ms. Martin, sorry.
Thank you. This is file number 23-298. Roll number 0309122940. The address is 3485 Pembina Highway. For the 2024 roll year, the assessed value is $2,386,000. This is again a strip mall with 7 premises. The actual year built is 1977. We do have an effective year built of 1985 on that one. The land area is 37,353 square feet. The plan area that we have is 9,555 square feet. We do have a sale. $2,425,000, and our records show that it was an arm's length sale. We have on page 3 the rental comparables, and they are from $17.05 to $18.50 per square foot. And these are for other strip malls in the area. On page 4, we have our income workup. For the 9,372 square feet, we have a potential rent of $170,885. For that, we've applied a 4% vacancy loss, 3% for expenses, and $9 per square foot for shortfall, giving us a net operating income of $155,754. We've applied a capitalization rate of 6.45%, giving us our estimated value after adjustments at $2,415,000. On page 6, we have our capitalization information. And on page 8 through 13 is the mailer. And on page 14, there is an overhead view of the subject property. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Martin, again, going to page 4, am I correct that this is entirely model driven right from potential rent through to cap rate?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. With respect to on your page 2, the April 6th, 2021 purchase at $2,425,000, did you have a chance to review the sales questionnaire that was returned to the department?
I believe one of my coworkers did, but the information that I've written down here is simply that it was an arm's length sale.
Okay, and that's all that you've gathered relating to the transaction sales questionnaire?
I don't have the sales questionnaire open in front of me, but that's the only information that I can answer definitively on.
Certainly, I appreciate that. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Diamond?
I have no questions, thank you.
Just to confirm, Ms. Martins, the sale information came from the sales mailer. It didn't come from the search of land titles or search of any of the systems?
I got my information from the sales mailer. I wasn't looking more deeply into the sale at this time. So yes, just from the sales mailer.
Thank you. I don't have anything further. Then Mr. Reimer, your evidence, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Would like to comment just very briefly on that sale transaction. Yes, it did go through land titles. And yes, the owner did, there's a box on the sales questionnaire that asks, is this an open arm's length open market transaction? And they did indeed check off yes in the yes no column. So Ms. Martin's testimony is bang on. That's entirely consistent with the questionnaire. The reason for my question of Ms. Martin's relating to the questionnaire itself, though, one of the questions on the questionnaire relates to the appraisal. Was an appraisal done for the property, and if so, what was the value? I don't have the appraiser here to provide evidence, but what I will say is that in this case, the appraised value was actually less, both than the sale price and the current assessment, but I'm going to leave it at that because I'm not authorized to speak as to the details of the appraisal and the value that they derive for that purpose. If one turns to our submission on page 7, pages 6 and 7, you can see on page 6 again the street view. Page 7, the aerial shot of the subject, constructed in 1977. I believe the department's got a variant age, which will reflect, the maintenance and the improvements done at the property over the years. We take no quarrel with that. The land area in this case, the land to building ratio is very good at 3.91 to 1, with the building area of 37,353 square feet. So if you go to, in this case, Mr. Chairman, and you'll appreciate that the bulk of our information that we have relates to post-reference material. So we were trying to be very cautious not to incorporate that. So on page 11, we talk about the information we do have as of the reference date, and there are 3 gross rents in place that had estimated net rents of between $15.95 a foot and $17.28 a foot. On page 12, we've got comparables on Pembina Highway showing a range of between $14 a square foot at the low end up to $22 at the high end. And that's certainly consistent with with the department's rent comps they provided. And in fact, we've got some comparables there that are higher still than what the department had generated in their submission. So what we're suggesting, Mr. Chairman, based on what we do know prior to the reference date and based upon the rental indicators shown on the chart on page 12, at the bottom of page 12, you can see our estimated potential net market income of $163,349. That's turned based on the two net rents we do know about, plus market income or market rents, I should say, between $17.50 and $18 a square foot for those spaces where we did not have information prior to the reference date. And so with those rents being submitted in our valuation, along with the 4% vacancy, $9 shortfall, non-recovered of 7% total, capitalization rate in this case of 675. Again, it's a property that's well maintained and also has a much better land to building ratio than the ones we've seen before this morning. It's 3.91 to 1. So certainly the quality and risk profile for the subject would place it at the very lower risk end of the average properties based on our capitalization rate submission. So on page 14, then we come in, as you can see there, with the 163,349 potential rent, 4% vacancy, $9 shortfall, 5 and 2, and a 675 cap. We come in at a rounded value of $2,111,000, notwithstanding the factual evidence of the purchase price, but with the knowledge of the some of the details relating to that transaction, we do believe a fair assessment in this case would be $2,111,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Martins, questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Diamond?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Knight?
No, sir.
I just have one with respect to the calculation of your actual net rents or available net rents. Again, those are the gross rents that a estimated net rent or estimated expenses have been applied.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And similarly to the other questions I asked with respect to the other property, that estimated net rent is with respect to, I'll ask this question. Are those with respect to actual expenses, either stabilized or disclosed, or is that a net rent taken from averages?
Pure estimate, no specific number again in this case, because the information is post-reference, Mr. Chairman. So those are indeed estimates.
Thank you. I don't have anything further. Ms. Martins, any need of a summary?
No, thank you.
Mr. Reimer?
Oh, thank you.
Then we will turn, please, to the last item on the list. That is item number 6, street address 3554 Pembina Highway. Ms. Martins, your evidence, please.
Thank you. This is file number 23-118, roll number 030929999155. The address is 3554 Pembina Highway. For the 2024 roll year, the assessed value is $2,052,000. This is again a strip mall with 6 premises. It was built in 1980 with an effective year of 1986. The land area is 32,977 square feet, and the plan area is 7,210 square feet. On page 2, we show some subject property leases ranging from $17.70 per square foot to $22.20 per square foot. On page 3, we have some rental comparables ranging from $18 a square foot to $20 a square foot. On page 4, we show our income workup. We have 6,954 square feet with a potential rent of $128,841. To that, we've applied a 4% vacancy, 3% for expenses, with a shortfall of $9 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $117,473. To that, we've applied a capitalization rate of 6.15%, which gives us capitalized value of $1,910,130. We do have additional land value of $142,000, giving us an estimated value after adjustments of $2,052,000. On page 6, we have the capitalization information. On page 8 and 9, we do have the mailer that was submitted. Now on page 10, we have a map view showing the location. And then we've got an overhead picture of the property on the bottom of page 10. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Reimer?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Martins, briefly on page 4, then, with the exception of the adjustments of 142,000, the remainder is model driven, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and if we turn to page 10, the very last page of your brief, and again, the adjustment was 142,000, as I understand it, for excess land, and that would relate to, if one looks at the bottom aerial photo, that relates to the land that would be at the southeast segment of that L-shaped site, correct?
Well, usually we don't denote exactly where that land is as far as additional land, but that would be the easiest way to apply it. It would be more that the land to plan ratio is fairly high.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, questions?
I do not, thank you.
And Mr. Diamond, questions?
No questions, thank you.
I have some questions with respect to the calculation of square footage. The notation of the leasable area is 6,954, and I'm going through the actuals, or the on page 2. I'm coming up with a different number. It's not materially different, about 200 square feet. But when I'm comparing those, and I will get to my question, Ms. Martins, when I'm comparing the numbers at page 2, there are 4 leases in place totaling just over 7,000 square feet. So presumably that's the entire floor area. But on your page 4, you have 6 different premises with varying amounts of rent, 3 of them at the 1832. How are those potential rents on page 4 reconciled to the actuals and the floor space rented on page 2? Or are the ones on page 4 simply model driven?
I think the confusion here is looking at it as though it's coming from one place. The information on page 2 is information that we have received from the mailers that we send out. So this is information that we've gotten from the property owners. Whereas if you're looking at page 4, that's information within our system. Now, at some point, it was determined that there should be 6 premises at this location, and those are the square footages. It looks as though in order to have 4 tenants, if you look at the first 2 tenants on page 2, they both have 2 different units. So this Positive Health Pharmacy is using 2 units, and this Golden Pet Home is using 2 units, whereas the Flamingo Vape Shop and the restaurant are each using 1. So that adds up to the 6 premises that we have here.
Okay, but the square footage still stays 200 square feet apart, roughly.
Yes, because this is when it was entered in, because we would have gotten the information and put this property into our system in the 1980s. Whereas this information from the square footage, we don't know exactly who measured or how they determined the size for the tenancies.
Okay. My other question is with respect to the cap rate, the 6.15% cap rate. What is there about this premises that makes it superior to account for a lower cap rate? Or can you answer that? Or is this just
This again is model, but we would take into consideration the age, the location, the quality of the property, the quality, the investment quality ranking. We take a lot of the other factors into consideration with this. Also, the land to plan ratio would also be considered in that.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Reimer, your evidence, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask board members and Ms. Martins to turn to pages 6 and 7. On page 6, we've got again the street view of the property located at 3554 Pembina. This is out in St. Norbert, as was the previous property. Top of page 7, this is again the aerial photograph, and it shows the higher amount of land that is contained within this roll number. The land to building ratio, there's a typo there. It says 2.47 to 1. That is incorrect. If you could please change that to 4.57 to 1. And I'll make that change at this end. There is, as Ms. Martins alluded to, there is certainly an excess land component, and we're agreeing with the adjustment of 142,000. Recall, Mr. Chairman, I'd asked Ms. Martins if in effect the excess land would be to the sort of the northeast part of that site, and I would suggest, based on traffic flows, ingress and egress, I would suggest it would be. If there was availability to develop the component, it would most logically be at that corner, so you don't impede in any way the parking or the traffic flows of the existing strip mall that's located on it. So we've applied the same adjustment of 142,000 tenant valuation. And if one turns then to page 11 of our submission. So we are applying the higher leasable area that's been reported by the owner, is indicated on that chart towards the middle of the page. Total leasable area we've applied is 7,174 square feet, with a total potential net market income of 132,314, based on the leases, as you see there, negotiated between 2017 and 2019. That's actually, call it $4,000 or $3,500 higher than the rent that the model imputed for the property. So rental rates certainly doesn't appear to be an issue here. Give for the board's information at the top of page 12, the rental comparables, certainly the rents that are being generated fall well within those ranges shown there, and we are applying the total potential rent of 132,314 with a vacancy of 4%, shortfall of 9%. Again, for the reasons we discussed, the full 7% non-recoverable and a capitalization rate of 6.75%, which is at the very lower end of the standard quality retail properties as shown in our capitalization rate study, and with the excess land adjustment of 142,000 as assessed. One turns briefly to page 14, then you can see the valuation there using the net rent at the higher area of 7,174 square feet and the slightly higher rent of 132,314. Interesting, I've got a vacancy allowance of 6% rather than 4%. I'm going to suggest, Mr. Chairman, that should have been 4%. So I will run through those calculations very shortly. We've applied apparently also a shortfall rate of $7. So clearly I wasn't paying attention to this valuation sheet as closely as I should have. But again, the non-recoverable at 5 and 2 and a cap rate of 6.75 results in a value of 1,669,000 plus the 142,000 land adjustment, with a total value that's shown there of 1,811,000. Bear with me, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to correct, because in fairness, I do believe the vacancy allowance should be 4% and not 6% in this case. So I'm just going to run through those numbers using that lower vacancy allowance. So the revised effective market income would be 127,021. The revised total non-recoverable expense allowance for both the non-recoverable and what's we're labeling as other or structural would be 8,891. The shortfall allowance would decrease, the shortfall allowance would decrease to $2,008. So the revised NOI is 116,116,122. Capped at 675, results in a indicated value of 1,720,326. And then adding in the adjustments for the excess land of 142,000 results in a revised request, please, of 1,862,000. With the application of the corrected vacancy allowance of 4%. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Ms. Martins, any questions?
My only questions were the discrepancy on the calculation. Thank you for going through the exercise of correcting that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, questions?
No, sir.
Mr. Diamond?
I have no questions, thank you.
And I don't have any questions. Ms. Martins, any need for summary?
No, there isn't. Thank you.
Mr. Reimer?
No, thank you.
And I believe that completes every matter on the list. As these matters are concluded, I will adjourn the meeting.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations.